Hello everyone and welcome to another video. A twister roller coaster with 4 stations can reach a throughput of about 20,000 guests per hour, which is a lot, and it's the maximum I have ever reached on a ride without using any fancy tricks. For a long time this was my record for the highest number of guests per hour, but about half a year ago I beat that by constantly expelling the guests immediately after they've boarded. This allowed me to reach a new record of about 35,000 guests per hour, nearly twice the previous record. But even this is now outdated, as all these incredibly impressive optimized roller coasters are beaten by one single toilet boy. If you trap the maximum of 9600 guests on a single tile with a food stall and a toilet, the toilet will get an average throughput of about 50,000 guests per hour, about 50% more than the best roller coaster. And this was my record for the highest throughput ever without using cheats, until now. There is one stall that can beat this, and that is the balloon stall. If guests are happy enough, they will buy a balloon if they come across a balloon stall. Once they have a balloon though, they won't buy another one, as just like with other souvenirs they can only have one of each at a time. This makes the balloon stall no different from the sunglasses stall or hat stall, except for one thing, and that is that unlike everything else, balloons can be lost. Sometimes a guest will randomly let go of their balloon and then they are able to buy a new one. There is a function named update sprite type, and every time it is called there is a 1 in 200 chance that the guest lets go of their balloon. This function is by default called every 12.8 seconds, but it can be executed more frequently if the guest does something that changes their sprite, such as buying food. Numbers can be a little bit difficult to translate into reality in your head, so to get a feel for how often they let go, I decided to run a little experiment. Here are 1000 guests that have all ridden 3 rides trapped on a tile with a food stall and a balloon stall. They will never want to leave and will always buy a balloon if they can. I ran this for 10 years and in that time the stall sold 12,400 balloons, which is 1.24 balloons per guest per year. So while we can sell more balloons this way, it's not very fast. There are other ways to make your guests lose their balloons though. When you beat the scenario, every guest starts applauding and will let go of their balloon. This does allow you to immediately sell another balloon to however many guests you have in the park, but the obvious downside is that this only works once per save file. The third and final method is very cruel, and that is drowning the guest. When a guest hits water, they let go of their only flotation device and as a result drown. But if instead of letting them go under you pick them up again, they survive and are ready to buy a new balloon. I actually made a video about this a few years ago after Max Arceus came up with the idea during a livestream. This worked quite well in the video and you can make one guest buy an infinite number of balloons, but it's again not very fast. If we try to scale this up, we quickly hit a limit as I can only move my mouse so quick. But there is one button that makes everything possible, and that is the pause button. You can pick up guests and move them while the game is paused, which gives us an infinite amount of time to reposition any guest to any place we want. So here's the setup to sell tons of balloons very quickly. We have one tile with a balloon stall that gives out free balloons and then another one with some water. Then at some point we pause the game, go through every single guest, and if they have a balloon we pick them up and place them on the water tile. If the guest is drowning instead, then we pick them up and place them next to the balloon stall again. Sounds simple enough, right? But we can't do this with just any old guests, as we need to prepare them a little. Guests only buy souvenirs when they've ridden at least 3 rides, which is why in the earlier experiments the guests had all ridden 3 tiny mazes. I know I said it's 2 rides in my previous video, but I had misread the code. It's actually 3, which is confirmed by some experiments. Here we have the same setup, but with a maximum of 9600 guests instead of 1000. The final sprite slot is taken up by an entertainer to make sure they're as happy as possible. I also made sure that the guests are fully energized. Energized guests walk and fall faster and will thus be able to buy new balloons more quickly. When they are trapped with a food stall, their energy level does not change, so I trapped them in a queue line for a while, as when they're queuing they do gain energy. After that I put them back on the tile with the food stall, and now we have a park with 9600 guests that have the maximum values for energy and happiness and are ready to buy any souvenir. With this setup we can now start the run, and this will take absolutely forever. Every time the game is paused, which is several times a second, we need to check in what state every single one of our 9600 guests is and move them accordingly. This will take at least an hour to do per pause, and to get a long enough run we'll have to pause the game hundreds of times. Sure, it's theoretically possible to do this, but it's completely unrealistic. Luckily, plugins exist, and Smitty made a plugin for us that can automate this process entirely. This plugin allows us to select 3 tiles, one that the balloon stall is next to, one with water and one with a cash machine. Then, when we start the teleporting, every few ticks it will evaluate all the guests and teleport the guests with balloons to the water and teleport the drowning guests back to the balloon stall. It can also teleport guests to the cash machine if they're running out of cash, but that's not relevant here as we made the balloons free to get the throughput as high as possible. We will use this cash machine function in a later video though. With this plugin we can actually perform the experiment and see how many balloons we can sell per hour. I've set the plugin to check all the guests every 10 ticks, which is 4 times a second. I think that's a reasonable and realistic speed, as manually unpausing and repausing the game within a quarter of a second isn't too difficult. This is very resource intensive though, and it causes a lot of lag, but it works and we're selling so many balloons so incredibly quickly. This has the exact same effect as if we would be pausing the game and doing it manually, except now we don't have to do anything and we can just sit back and watch it all happen. This plugin does have a little memory leak, and during this month-long run my game did crash twice because it was using more than 50 GB of RAM, thank god for autosaves, but that doesn't matter as it works and we can now perform this, so a big thank you to Smitty for making this plugin. When the throughput number first updates, it immediately goes to over 400,000 and smashes the old record of 50,000 on the toilet, and this will only get higher. The way the game calculates throughput is by taking the number of guests that have ridden the ride in the past 5 minutes and then it multiplies that by 12. This means that the throughput number will take 5 minutes of continuous operation to max out, and we have only just started. However, this number is wrong for 2 reasons. Firstly, what the game thinks is an hour is actually just 48 minutes, and the 5-minute duration I just mentioned is actually just 4 minutes. You can see this with all time values everywhere. Rollercoaster Tycoon 2 runs at 40 ticks per second, but for these calculations the game thinks it runs at only 32 ticks per second, and this causes all the displayed times to be 25% longer than the real times. For example, if you get a ride with a ride time of 35 seconds, it will actually be only 28 seconds long. You can easily verify this yourself by building a ride, timing how long it is and comparing that with the number that the game gives you. For the purposes of this video we will just ignore this all though and pretend that it is correct, as that is what we have done for the previous videos about high throughputs. It's the displayed number of guests per hour that determines the record, not the true number. If you do want to know the true number, simply multiply any result by 1.25. The other error is something we have to correct for, and it makes the displayed number much lower than it should be. Yes, even this ridiculously high number that has already passed 1 million guests per hour is too low. This is because the game updates the customers per hour number every 30 seconds, or rather every 24 seconds, but we've just been over that, and we sell more balloons in that time frame than the game can keep track of. In order to still get an accurate answer, I'll let the game run for a little over a month, write down the number of balloons that were sold at the first frame of April and the first frame of May, and from there calculate the correct amount of customers per hour. At the start of April this number was 180,424, and a month later it was 3,051,928. This means that we sold nearly 3 million balloons in just one single month. We can now use some math to translate this into the number of guests per hour, and this comes out to an insane 20,190,000 balloons sold every hour, or about 5,600 per second. This is a casual 400 times higher than the 50,000 we reached on the toilet, so it's safe to say that that record is completely annihilated. Because we gave away our balloons for free, they each cost us 30 cents in production costs, and as a result we lost nearly €1,000,000 in April. This is the worst month I've ever seen without building anything or altering any terrain. Even hiring 200 mechanics, the most expensive staff member, only costs you 16,000 a month. As insane as this is though, we can still go higher, and this is done by the stall that wants revenge: the toilet. In my video about beating Rollercoaster Tycoon without guests riding any rides, I used toilet income to beat some of the scenarios that have a monthly ride ticket profit goal. This worked for the ones that required just a few thousand, but since the maximum price the guests will ever pay to pee is 60 cents, the maximum number of 9,601 guests going all at once only gets you about €5,700, and it takes them too long to build up their need again to go twice in 1 month. However, then, of course, none other than Nisse came up with a solution. What if we double close the toilet to force the guests out and make them pay again? You see, guests don't instantly have their toilet value go to 0 once they enter the toilet. Instead, it slowly goes down over time, and there's even a short little bit of time in between when they enter and when it starts to go down. If we immediately expel the guests as soon as they enter the bathroom, then they will go into it over and over and over again. So here we have the same setup with 9,600 guests, only this time they're trapped with the toilet. The idea is simple: open up the toilet, wait a few tenths of a second, then pause the game, double close and reopen the toilet to force everyone out, and then unpause the game before repausing a fraction of a second later. This will take quite a while to do, but unlike the balloon stall run, we can actually do this one manually. Like before, the customers per hour number can't keep up with this, so we're going to have to calculate it ourselves. The toilet and all other rides only counts guests as having ridden it once they exit properly, so in this experiment the total number of guests will always be 0, which means that we can't use it here to keep track of the number of guests that have entered the toilet. Interestingly though, it does show a number for the guests per hour, as that counts them as soon as they enter. In order to keep track of how many guests have entered, I will charge 10 cents, so that at the end we can simply look at our ride income to see how many guests have used the toilet. We do run into an actual problem though, and that is that the guests really don't like being ejected from rides. Every time this happens, their happiness value gets cut in half, and there is no amount of entertainers in the world that can counteract this fast enough. Unhappy guests do still go to the bathroom, so that's not the problem, but eventually they will want to leave the park, and at that point they won't go to the toilet anymore. This will not happen to everyone at the same time, but slowly over time the throughput will go down more and more. This means that now we need to answer the following question: what is the minimum amount of time that a throughput needs to be sustained for before we can use it to calculate the number of customers per hour? We only did 1 month, which is less than 7 minutes for the balloons, but there the throughput doesn't change, so it's fine. But what about the situation like this? This information kiosk just sold 9,601 maps in 1 game tick, which is a 40th of a second. An hour, according to the game, is 115,200 ticks long, so doing the calculation, this information kiosk has a throughput of over 1.1 billion guests per hour. This is obviously ridiculous and makes no sense at all, but where is the exact limit? The game itself uses the number of guests in the last 4 minutes to calculate the answer, so I think that it's reasonable to require 4 minutes of sustained throughput. This is long enough that if the game could deal with the very high numbers, we would actually see the correct value displayed. 4 minutes is 17.5 days in a 30-day month, so I'll run this experiment for 18 days and then calculate the answer from that. This was quite a tedious task and it took me over an hour to do it with all the lag, but eventually it was done and we can now calculate our answer. We made about 255,000 euros from toilet income, which means that 2,553,138 guests have gone to the bathroom in 18 days of a 30-day month. Again, we can use some math and calculate that this is the equivalent of 29.92 million guests per hour, nearly 50% more than the balloon stall. This is the highest throughput I have ever seen on any ride or stall in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. With all the new discoveries that have recently been made, I wouldn't be surprised if this record gets broken again sometime in the future, but for now this is the new record and it's beaten the old one of 50,000 by about 600 times. To learn about how you can beat extreme heights using just a balloon stall, click right here. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.